Hello, and welcome to Everybody Eats, a Washington Wizards podcast on the Blue Wire Network. My name is Varun Shankar. I'm the Wizards reporter for the Washington Post. The Wizards season is here, and I had Monumental Sports Chase Hughes on the podcast to talk about what we've seen from the team across the first 3 games. This is the first in-season pod, so let me give you a quick rundown of what to expect most often during the year. We'll start with the lead, which is basically the most important story from the last week of Wizards basketball. After that, we'll go to stock up, stock down, which is looking at some of the notable performances, good or bad, from the last week. I'll then play the audio of the week, which is an interesting snippet from a press availability. The guest and I will then each try to get ahead of the curve, giving a take that might be a little aggressive, might be a little bit too early, but we think might be true and we don't feel too strongly about anyway. We'll then usually try to get to 1 to 2 mailbag questions and wrap up by asking what we'd like to find out from the next week of Wizards basketball. Before we get to that, if you like the show and you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please leave a 5-star rating or review. I love talking to Chase. We actually sit next to each other during games, so this felt a bit like just hitting record on one of those conversations. Let's get to it right now. Joining me now on the Everybody Eats podcast is Chase Hughes of Monumental Sports. Chase, how are you, man?
Doing great. Long time no see.
I know. It's been like 7 whole hours, I think, something like that. We're recording Monday morning. The Wizards are now 1-2. They are 26th in net rating, 25th in offensive rating, 24th in defensive rating per Cleaning the Glass. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today. We're going to start with a big picture look at the team so far. We're going to go up in who's doing well, who's not. We're going to go through a mailbag question, all sorts of stuff. This is how the regular in-season episodes are going to go. Let's start, like all journalism should, with the lead. Chase, what's the most important story of the last Wizards week to you?
I think it's the emergence of Kyshawn George. The first 2 games that he had were very rare for franchise history. You know, the youngest player to start a season with 2 consecutive 20-point games. And then that game he had against Dallas, I know there was a letdown against Charlotte, but that was a pretty special performance for a player his age. And I think what it has represented so far is like the most tangible evidence that we've seen in this rebuild of a player making an offensive leap. I could argue that Bilal Coulibaly took a big step forward defensively last year, but this, I think, was on a different level when it comes to scoring. And I think it's real. I mean, obviously, he's going to be tested as film gets out there and teams figure out what he does well, and they try to take that away. And, you know, he moves up the scouting report. But I think Wizards fans and the Wizards have to be really encouraged by the way that Kyshawn George played, especially those first 2 games.
The last game was obviously a little bit of a step back. He went 3 for 7 for the field, didn't score as well, but the first 2, I think 21 points against the Bucks, 34 career high against the Mavericks. And you see, one thing that stood out to me is you could see the trust the Wizards have in him because they're empowering him to play with the ball more and more. This was something we saw late last season. Late last season, they looked at it as kind of an experimentation. They wanted to see, what does this look like when we put the ball in this guy's hands? He showed them enough, and he showed them more during the offseason. He showed them with his play in AmeriCup, and you're seeing some of the results now.
Yeah, and I asked Brian Keefe, did you guys have this plan going into training camp, or is it something that he showed you in training camp? And he mentioned last year, and you mentioned it as well, but I think he must have dominated practices at training camp, because the extent to which they're running the offense through him, I looked up the numbers last night, and it's pretty surprising. So through the first 2 games, he averaged 78 touches per game. And I know possessions have gone up and up and up in the NBA, but just for comparison, that's what Bradley Beal was getting during his prime when he was averaging 30 points a game. That's what John Wall was getting toward the end of his tenure here. Now, John Wall and Russell Westbrook, they were up in the 90s in terms of touches per game. Westbrook was only here 1 year, but Wall at his peak in 16, 17, it was 95 touches per game. But that's still not that far away. So, we know they want an equal share offense, but they are really giving the keys to Kyshawn George on the offensive end. And I just wanted to share the one stat. People may have seen me tweet it, but yeah, he's just the 3rd player aged 21 or younger to have at least 30 points, 10 rebounds, 5 threes, 2 blocks, and 2 steals in a game. And the other ones were Victor Wembanyama and Luka Doncic. So those are 2 extremely good young players to be in the same sentence as.
Yeah, absolutely. I had Kyshawn in a later section when we talk about the stock up, but we might as well get to him right now. The usage rate is up. The efficiency is dramatically up. His assist rate is up. He's taking more shots at the rim, and he's taking dramatically less of his shots come off assist. That tells me that he's creating for himself. He's getting inside. What do you think he's shooting at the rim right now? This is per cleaning the glass.
I would guess that it's pretty high. I mean, his shooting numbers. I mean, the game against Dallas. I mean, what did he shoot? Like 80% from the field. What is he shooting at the rim?
He's at 91% at the rim.
Pretty
That's
decent.
not going to continue, obviously, but that's such an improvement from where he was last year, when last year, anytime he got inside, it was an adventure. You didn't know what was going to happen. He had a really good knack for getting past that initial guy, and I think that he played with good feel a lot of the time when he had the ball in his hands, but he would get inside, and you could tell that he said it himself, he didn't really know what to do when he got there, and he got a little bit indecisive at times. And then this year, he really worked on over the offseason, working on those bumps, working on his decision-making inside so that he's either creating a good shot for himself or he's drawing the help and getting getting a good shot for someone else. I mean, yesterday, even though he didn't have his greatest game against the Hornets, there was one play where he gets inside, he's kind of leaning back for a fadeaway jumper, and he draws the defense to him by doing so, and then he quickly adjusts in midair and gets a pass to Marvin Bagley for, I think, a dunk or a layup. And so that's the kind of playmaking that we're seeing from him, in addition to some of the early scoring numbers that we're seeing from him. I want to talk about his defense as well. His block rate is higher than it was last year, when it was already the 92nd percentile among wings. He's still fouling, which remains an issue from his first year as well. More on that later. But the big thing for me is he's also rebounding a lot better. And so if we look at him as someone who right now I think projects as a 4 in the NBA right now, as much as positional variances matter, but I do think he's someone who most often plays on that back line with Alex Sarr. I am curious how much his rebounding allows the Wizards to keep him there.
Well, last year I remember he played some at the 4, and we asked him about it, and he was like, "Well, I'm one of the tallest guys on the court." I think maybe Kuzma was hurt. Yeah, and he reportedly grew. So I think it sometimes is the 4 by default. I don't think that's necessarily like in Chris Middleton's nature, and it's going to be one or the other. And he's really embraced it. I think the rebounding has stood out the most. I mean, I think he's averaging about 9-10 rebounds a game. He's really embracing that. That's been an issue for the Wizards, of course, the last few years. We expect it to be an issue all season, their rebounding. So the fact that he is so versatile to kind of step up and fill the void, I think is really impressive, particularly because you just gotta, if you just total up like all the things the Wizards are asking him to do, it's really remarkable. It's not just the offensive role, but we've seen him start the game defending Giannis, and then Anthony Davis, and then LaMelo Ball, right? I think sometimes by default he's going to be guarding a guy like Giannis, even when Bilal comes back. I think when Bilal Coulibaly comes back, he gets the LaMelo Ball assignment, but I think it's either going to be Alex Sarr or Kyshawn George sometimes that have to guard some of the biggest, most aggressive, most physical players in the league.
Absolutely. Keyshawn's point of attack defense has been a little underwhelming to me. I do think he's much better right now as an off-ball defender, kind of coming in off that weak side, disrupting plays, using his timing, swiping at the ball. His on-ball defense still at times can be susceptible, and so that's something I want to see, especially against a guy like LaMelo. It was a roller coaster at times yesterday.
Yeah, and I was going to make this point about Bilal Coulibaly later in the episode, but I think it's relevant now. The Wizards are allowing the second most field goal attempts within 5 feet of the rim, so they're not stopping the ball at the perimeter. And I think that has a chance to be a problem all year. Like, you lose Marcus Smart. Obviously, he was your best guy at the point of attack. They haven't really yet developed someone who can be, I think, a plus player in that regard. I think maybe they draft that guy at a later date, or Bub Carrington, develops into him. But I think Bilal Coulibaly has a chance to change that. But it is worth noting, while they're allowing the second most attempts within 5 feet, the percentage that teams are shooting is actually pretty low. And I think that probably reflects well on Alex Sarr and maybe Kyshawn George as well, as you mentioned, what he's been doing around the rim.
Absolutely. On a similar note, my main story of the last week is the Wizards defense, which for a moment against Dallas looked like it might be a pretty good unit. Good is strong, but good for what the team has been over the last couple years, has struggled against everyone but Dallas. The second half against Charlotte, I was rewatching it this morning, and it is an adventure. You see a ton of different kinds of mistakes. There's poor switches, you see different players getting attacked, you see poor communication on ball screens or on help, and then some of it, of course, is LaMelo Ball is really good, and you do anything against him, and he will make you pay. But, I mean, yesterday there was a play where someone's, I think it was Concanipple, screened for LaMelo and then flared out to three. CJ and Bub are in the action, and CJ wants to switch, and it doesn't look like Bub gets the. I don't know if the communication was off or what happened, but both of them stay with LaMelo, and it's just an easy flare pass, and it's a three-pointer. Another play, LaMelo runs a pick and roll with Sion James, your guy Sion James, and
He was impressive.
He was great. I think Whitmore was on Ball, and then Kyshawn George was on James. I'm not sure what the coverage was supposed to be, to be honest, but both of them stay on Ball. It didn't really look like a blitz because neither of them was particularly aggressive with the way that they were trying to crowd LaMelo, and so he has a space and the time to just hit a bounce pass to James on the short roll, and it leads to a cutting dunk. That's just the kind of thing where the communication is going to be bad early in the season. There's still some new pieces that need to be ironed out, but you need to see that get ironed out as the season goes on, or else LaMelo's a really good player. You know who's also really good? SGA. You know who's also really good? Tyrese Maxey. Those are the guys that are coming up on the schedule, and the Wizards defense isn't going to have a much easier time against those guys than they did against the Hornets.
Yeah, you mentioned McCollum. I guess it sounds like maybe it wasn't all his fault, but he really took ownership a lot of the defensive mistakes, and in great detail in post game. I've been covering this league for a while. I've been covering sports for a long time. The detail of which he owned up to specific mistakes. I don't know if I've ever heard someone break it down quite like that, because he off the top of the post game press conference, he mentioned a few plays and then he just kept going. I would guess that he named 10 different very specific moments that he made mistakes on, which was cool and probably good leadership. And I think that maybe those things can improve over time as guys, get better chemistry on the defensive end. I think chemistry could be a strength of this team long term because they're trying to develop all these guys on the same timeline. And CJ McCollum obviously is just being integrated into the mix as a new player. And, he's a veteran, so he should be able to get up to speed quickly. But yeah, I think those types of things might be worth watching as the season goes on and these guys learn how to play with each other.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that part of it is also who he's playing with at times. I mean, there was a lineup yesterday where it's Will Riley, CJ McCollum, Trey Johnson, Corey Kispert, and Tristan Vukcevic. That's a tough lineup for a team to play out defensively. It's just there's a lot of guys that you could pick on, and there's a lot of guys who are still learning the game. And I think the most experienced defender out of that group is probably Corey Kispert, who's, I think, an underrated defensive player, but I still would not call a good defensive player. So I am curious how this defense looks as the season goes on, because I think there's a world where even if the Wizards achieve their goals this season of finishing with a record that guarantees them a top 8 pick in this draft, they keep their pick, there's a way that they can do it where the defense looks like some level of strength for them moving forward, and they start to forge that defensive identity. So far, it's been a little hit or miss.
Yeah, and you mentioned the schedule coming up. I'll go a little bit deeper into that later on when we talk about the week ahead. But I'll just say this, I think their defensive rating is going to be in shambles after the next few weeks. And then and I think it's going to be kind of skewed because of the schedule that they're about to play and some of the teams they're about to play. And I think they'll be recovering from that as the season goes on. So I might just kind of plant that seed now for Wizards fans. All right, what you see in the next couple weeks might not be indicative of what they will ultimately be defensively. I think we need to check back at the end of the season. They don't have Bilal Coulibaly. I think Alex Sarr is a really good defender. I think they have some really good defenders, but I think Bilal Coulibaly at this point is head and shoulders above the rest defensively. I really think that because we've seen Kyshawn George try to take on some of the same assignments that Bilal had last year, and I think he's done okay, but Bilal actually had success in a lot of these matchups last season. So I think that's something that he's going to be able to impact the team with right away. The shooting, I think, is going to take time because of the nature of the injury, right? It was his thumb. But like they're missing their best defensive player, so that's also got to be kept in mind.
Yeah, definitely on the perimeter, he's the best defensive player. But let's get to who I think might become the best defensive player by the end of this year. And let's go to the Wizards ticker and see who's got their stock up, stock down. The first stock up for me, Alex Sarr. I have been pretty impressed with what I've seen with him through the first 3 games. We talked a little bit about the rim defense, and with him on the court, opponents are shooting 8% less often at the rim, and they're shooting 5.6% worse with him on the court. Opponents are shooting 54.1% inside 6 feet per NBA.com. That's the 5th best mark among players with at least 20 such defended field goal attempts per NBA.com. Now, here's the thing. He's defended 36 such shots. That's 12 more than the second highest player. The gap between first and second is equal to the gap between second and somewhere in the 50s. I got bored of counting. The defense on the perimeter has not been good, but Sarr has done really well to clean stuff up. And then that's just on the defensive end. And you're seeing a lot of the things that we saw last year with the blocks, some of the interior defense. It didn't show up as well in some of the underlying numbers. Now you're starting to see it show up in the underlying numbers. You're seeing the impact. I mean, the Dallas game, he was everywhere. Like, they could not get a shot around the rim. And you're starting to see the growth for him in those areas as he starts to develop more as a player.
Yeah, and the fact that they're not stopping the ball at the perimeter makes that so much more impressive. I have come to appreciate just being able to stop dribble drives at the perimeter and how important that is for rim protection on the back end. Like, I think Chet Holmgren probably has the easiest job, maybe in NBA history, as a rim protector because of the guards that are in front of him. Like, no one is taking a straight line drive to the rim against the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Meanwhile, there are some rim protectors, and maybe Chet in a different situation would prove to be this good, but like a Rudy Gobert is so good that he can clean up mistakes even if there is a straight line drive to the rim. Maybe Alex Sarr could end up being that good, but I think just what goes through my mind is like, well, how good would he be if there was less penetration into the paint? Because as I mentioned, teams are getting in there, at the second highest rate essentially in the league. So that's really impressive, and I think is probably going to make him stronger for down the road once the Wizards do get better at stopping the bleeding on the perimeter.
Brian Keefe talks a lot about throwing guys into the fire. Alex Sarr has been thrown into the fire over the first year and then 3 games of his career. He has a very difficult job, and he's done a pretty good job on it as a defender. Let's talk about his offense. This was something that a couple of people asked us about on the mailbag. His shot selection looks dramatically different than it does last year. What have you thought about his look so far and what he's trying to do on offense?
I think it was a course correction that I expected, but to this extent, I did not expect. They've basically taken the steering wheel and just completely jerked it to one direction. He only took 1 3-point attempt in the first 2 games, didn't take one in the first game. He had at least a 3-point attempt in every single game last year. But, it makes sense. He shot sub 40% from the field last year as a 7-footer, so something was going to have to change. And I think Alex Sarr last night in, Alex Sarr fashion, because his answers to our questions are generally pretty short and succinct, I think he probably put it best, and he said it's kind of about confidence. If he starts out the game, like establishing a presence in the paint, getting some easy baskets, and those are the easiest baskets for him because he's 7 feet tall and he's got a 37-inch vertical leap, then he sees the ball go through the rim, and then he can sort of work his way out to the perimeter from there. So I think it makes a ton of sense. That's what a lot of teams do with their big men. I wouldn't be surprised if, when we see Joel Embiid, soon, that the Sixers do that. So I think it's about building confidence within games. And then it also might be, if you continue to go on this track and say he had another subpar shooting season, could that affect his confidence as a player and affect his development? So I think it makes a ton of sense. It's playing to his strengths. It's going to make him a more efficient player, and it could set a more proper tone within games moving forward. And, as we saw against the Hornets, he started on the, towards the rim, dunked on Ryan Kalkbrenner, and then after that knocked down a 3 pretty confidently.
It starts with him getting to the rim, and to me it's a function of reps. Last year, the Wizards wanted him to shoot a lot of 3-pointers, in part because they wanted him to get reps shooting 3-pointers. And now that he's a little bit more physically developed, I think you're seeing them try and emphasize the interior game as a way for him to improve and show off some of the improvements he's tried to work on in the offseason. He's playing with more force down there. I also think that with him rolling hard, it could open up opportunities for him to show his skills as a passer. He was really good on the short roll last year. If you're drawing more attention when you're rolling to the rim, that puts rim pressure, and now guys have to collapse the defense in on you, and you can kick out, which he does really well. So those are two areas that I think the downstream effects of him being more aggressive in the rim could be helpful. But I mean, listen, he took 28% of his shots at the rim last year. This year, it's 50% so far. He shot 63% at the rim last year. Now he's up to 69%. Last year, he was very tentative. He would fade away a lot. This year, like you said, he dunked on Kalkbrenner. He got an offensive foul for being too forceful. That's totally fine by me. If Alex Sarr is gonna get a foul because he put his shoulder into a guy and knocked him over, that is a perfectly acceptable offensive foul / turnover to get. There was a second quarter pick and roll with Kyshawn George where one thing that was a big problem in his first year was he would not make contact on enough screens. There were too often these ghost screens, and sometimes it was intentional, sometimes it was just him missing, to be honest, or being too eager to get out there. But in the second quarter pick and roll, he makes contact on the screen, he rolls, catches the ball in stride, lays it in. That's perfect. Do exactly that. Goes up strong, goes up and finishes over Kalkbrenner using his length to his advantage there. So it has been a very encouraging start to see what Alex Sarr looks like so far in year 2. It's now just a matter of containing it and continuing it.
Yeah, and I think, any player is going to want to have as many of the 3 levels as they can as a scorer. And, he was much more of a 3-point shooter last year. Hopefully that continues to develop. But he's going to have to work on what he does around the rim, and that'll just make him a more complete player. And I think not only the passing, but he's shown some flashes off the dribble as well. Mm-hmm. And the more you can keep teams guessing, the more effective he'll be in that regard too.
I'm curious, they run those DHOs with him operating from the top of the key so often. I'm curious if one thing he has not done much of, and he most often gives the ball on the handoff to one of the guards. I'm curious if at what point he starts getting more comfortable to pull the ball and then take it himself and kind of use some of the advantages he has there. But we'll see how that looks as the season goes on. Who do you have for stock up?
Kyshawn George. I think that's a logical place to start. I think right now he's probably the furthest along in his development of all the Wizards' young players. He's, I think, shown the most promise as a two-way player. All their young guys obviously have the potential to be two-way players, but I think most of them are a little bit further along on one end of the court. I think what he's doing and the way he's doing it and not really showing like any frustration as someone who's being asked to do so much on both ends, I find to be really impressive. He's kind of a stoic guy. We know he's got like his signature 3-point celebration. He made a 3 against the Mavs in the second half and turned around and looked at the Mavericks bench. I don't know if someone was chirping, but then he kind of had like an angry expression on his face as he was going down the court, and it just kind of reminded me like he doesn't show a whole lot of emotion. This is a kind of a crazy comparison, but he reminds me a little bit. And actually, you know what? This isn't a crazy comparison. It's 2 guys from Switzerland. Kind of reminds me of how Roger Federer would play tennis, where like
wow,
he would just like surgically beat people and like seemingly never sweat or never like show much emotion at all. Maybe there's something about the culture in Switzerland. But yeah, and Nick Backstrom is another guy he's from Switzerland, right? Or is he from Sweden? I don't know.
I think he's from Sweden.
Yeah, he's from Sweden. But anyways, there's some athletes that make it look easy when you know it isn't. And if you just consider all that they're asking him to do, I find that really impressive because I feel like some of the fouls, there's some players who would get upset about maybe the situation they're being put in if they feel like it's too much. He shows no signs of that.
He's showing early signs of becoming the team's leader as well, which stands out to me. He took Bub Carrington, put his arm around him at the end of the Mavericks game after Bub had a tough shooting night. And there are consistent times where you could see him calling out the defensive coverages and communicating really well. And he seems to be someone who has not only has the skills to be a leader, but is also embracing that role early on in his career. It is worth noting, as always with Kyshawn, that he's a little bit older than the rest of the Wizards young guys, even though he only did 1 year in college. He's nearly 22 years old. Compare that to a guy like Sarr, who's 20, and Bub, who's also 20, and a really young 20 at that. Bilal is also just 21. So there's some of that I think plays into Kyshawn being a little further ahead. You see, he is more filled out, I think, than any of the other young guys. His body is, he's already really strong. He's already bumping NBA guys off their spots. So that is something worth noting with Kyshawn. Another guy that I had stock up, Trey Johnson. 3 games into his NBA career, he looks very comfortable. Natural score, he's scoring 17 points per game, shooting nearly 43% on threes. He can't hit anything at the rim so far, but he's doing decently in kind of that short midi area, leaning back, little floaters, putting it off the glass. And so I think he's looked comfortable. I think he's looked more than adequate for a rookie.
He's also stock up for me. I don't think anyone could have expected that he'd be off to this good of a start as a three-point shooter. Like, obviously, there was plenty of reason to think that he would hit the ground running as a rookie because he shot so well at Texas last year, not just from college three-point range, but from NBA three-point range. It was just around 40% on 200 attempts. I thought that the fact that he shot really well in transition last year from 3 was going to help him because the Wizards like to play fast. He also shot really well from the corners last year at Texas, about 55%, and the Wizards have found him a lot of opportunities on corner threes so far. But just to the extent to which he's looked like a NBA veteran going out there and knocking down threes, I think has still been a little bit surprising because, he felt like he had an up and down preseason. He showed some promise certainly in the summer league, but had a bit of an up and down summer league. He didn't light the world on fire. So this is like the best that we've seen from him so far. And I always find that really interesting when a guy is better when the games like start to count than they were in the summer league or in the preseason.
Yeah, Trey, the shooting translates for a lot of players. But, even for Kyshawn George, for example, he shot 40% in his lone season at Miami, and then he struggled last season. I think he shot like 32% from 3. So it is not a guarantee that the three-pointer translates, and it still isn't for Trey. We're 3 games into an 82-game season, but early on, everything tells you that this is someone who's going to be a high-level shooter, and the fact that he's making them early could be helpful down the line because now defenses have to respect him. And maybe he can get some more attacking closeouts and play with the ball a little bit more because this is one of the first times he's played a primarily off-ball role in his career, and it's also one of the first times he's come off the bench consistently in a while. And so there's an adjustment period that comes with that, and hitting shots early can help with that.
Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see him go up against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And yeah. I'm not going to make anything of whether he struggles or not, because I think they've got the best perimeter defense in NBA history. They've got like 4 guys on their perimeter defense that were either all defense or received all defensive team votes last year. You know the names, right? Lou Dort, Caruso, Cason Wallace, SGA, Jalen Williams. They've got, I've said this before, they've got 5 of the 10 best point of attack guard defenders in the league. Yeah. In an era where three-point shooting is king. And what they did defending three-point shots last year was very special and made Sam Presti look really smart, sort of seeing where the league was headed and adapting to the degree that they have. It's incredible. It kind of reminds me of the Kansas City Chiefs always having the 4 fastest wide receivers in the league, and then obviously a quarterback who can hit them in stride. Trey Johnson, he's going to have as big of a challenge as you could possibly have for what he's doing, and there'll be a little bit of film on what he can do. So that's going to be a really big test, and whether he succeeds or not, I think it'll be fascinating to watch.
Him against Cason Wallace, I'm very interested to watch. They played each other in high school. I think they each dropped 30-plus points against each other. With the OKC, right. Obviously, when the Wizards go to OKC, there's a lot of comparisons with OKC just because of where the DNA of this organization with Michael Winger and Will Dawkins in particular comes from. They spent a lot of time with the Thunder. One thing that stands out to me with Oklahoma City is because they have those perimeter defenders and such great perimeter defense and the communication, they play such an aggressive defensive scheme. They're always dictating to the opposition, whether it's how aggressive they're able to have their help defenders. Think about the way they loaded up in last year's playoffs against Nikola Jokic, and they were doing similar things in that season opener against Şengün. So you can see the ways where having...
Şengün played pretty well, though.
He played really well. Don't get me wrong. He played really well. But you could see
I'm
how,
a big Şengün guy.
Yeah, Chase, maybe the number one Şengün fan outside of Houston. But the fact that they have those great perimeter guys who can recover so quickly allows them to pack in a little bit more and make things really difficult for defenses. So it's going to be a very interesting to see how Trey Johnson reacts to that, and also to what extent the Wizards are able to recreate some level of that in DC.
And one thing I'll say about Trey Johnson that I expect for that game is it's the biggest challenge he could probably possibly face right now, and he's going to meet it head on. Like, I think if we have seen one thing about Trey Johnson is he is not scared at all. He's extremely assertive on the court, and we saw that from the jump in the Summer League, and I haven't seen that really waver yet. Like, sometimes in interviews he'll be like, yeah, I wish I'd been playing better, but he's got just a great, just like internal motor when he's on the court. And so I think he's not going to back down, like even if it is a physical game and, that's becoming apparent by halftime. Like I don't think he's going to get timid or sort of get lost in the sauce in the second half. That just does not seem to be in Trey Johnson's nature.
Absolutely. Do you have any other stock ups?
I do, actually, and it might be surprising. I tend to try to zig when other people zag, right? I'm going to say Bilal Coulibaly is
okay.
His stock is up. A lot of fans might expect us to say that his stock is down, but I think sometimes when you're out with injury and your team is struggling in a specific area, your value becomes magnified. And I think that's been the case for Bilal Coulibaly because we've seen Kyshawn George, we've seen some other guys guard the best player on the opposing team. I think I would like to highlight in particular what LaMelo Ball did to the Wizards, 38-point triple-double. I don't think that happens if Bilal Coulibaly is playing in that game. He had success against a lot of star players last year, LaMelo Ball included. And I think, if you really look at the tracking data and the matchup numbers and, the defensive field goal percentage and what players shot against him compared to their season averages, like Bilal Coulibaly was like a step or two away from really making a name for himself, I think, around the league as one of the best wing defenders in the NBA. And so I think once he comes back, whenever it is, he'll be the guy who's starting the game on a LaMelo Ball. I don't know about a Giannis or an Anthony Davis, certainly a Cooper Flagg if he's back by the time they play Dallas. But yeah, I think Bilal Coulibaly is very needed right now, and so they'll welcome him back with open arms.
Yeah, last year in 3 games against LaMelo Ball, Bilal Coulibaly held him to a 30% field goal percentage and 13.3 on threes. Ball had 9 assists to 4 turnovers, and I think Coulibaly had 2 blocks against him. So you could see the impact that he had last season against a really strong player. I will say this, just another quick aside. I was really impressed with LaMelo yesterday. Obviously 38 points, but he had a lot of offensive rebounds. I think he's playing a lot better on both sides of the ball. So I am pleasantly encouraged by what I've seen from the Hornets young star. But this is not a Hornets podcast, so let's move on to the next thing. Do you have any other stock up, or is that the last one?
That's my last one.
Perfect.
Yeah. I had 3.
Okay, perfect. Stock down. Who do you got?
I think Bub Carrington, objectively speaking right now, stock down offensively, hasn't been shooting very well, but I think it's worth noting that he's getting a lot of praise for his defense and, particularly what he's doing on the ball. And Brian Keefe said he's kind of setting the tone for others, so I think that's worth noting. And also the small sample size. And also I'll say, that, I'm pretty high on his future. I think what he did down the stretch last season, creating shots for himself, and the way he improved his efficiency as the season went on, I was impressed by that. So I'm not, to go along with the metaphor, selling any of my Bub Carrington stock, but right now his stock would be down.
Yeah, it's been a tough start for him, and you can see, the rim finishing is still an adventure for him. He's taking more shots inside. I think there has been some level of concerted effort for him to get inside. It's been a work in progress for him to get there. It's also, again, worth noting, he's extremely young. He's 20.2 years old per Cleaning the Glass, so he's on the younger side of 20. He was one of the youngest guys in his draft class, and sometimes it might take longer, especially for someone playing guard. My first is also a young guard, AJ Johnson. There's just not minutes right now. Part of it, I think, is that AJ missed the entire preseason, but part of it is also that the Wizards, even though Jordan Poole was traded, they added CJ McCollum and they added Trey Johnson. And I bring this up mostly because it is a good reminder of how quickly players' fortunes can change based on who gets brought in. Let's say the Wizards get a top 3 pick this upcoming year and they take a player, depending on who that is, it could have massive ramifications for someone already on the roster whose minutes could change and whose role could also drastically change.
100%. Competition was a theme of training camp. Will Dawkins said it in his preseason press conference. And what that means is that there's going to be some domino effects this season. And I think right now AJ Johnson is the odd man out. And when Bilal Coulibaly comes back, there might be someone who's joining him in that category in the wing group, right? I think over the course of the season, they'll find a way to get AJ Johnson and, whoever is on the back end of the depth chart among the wings plenty of minutes. Maybe it will require time with the go-go. They said they're going to use the G League a little bit more than they did in years past because of this depth and this overflow. But right now, he's the first example of that competition sort of having some winners and losers to a certain extent.
Absolutely, and it's worth noting again that AJ didn't really get a chance to participate as much in that competition because he was returning from I think it was a thigh injury.
Right.
And he's healthy
now. And he was out a while. It seemed like, what Will told us in that preseason press conference, it seemed like he was out a little bit longer, at least that what I expected in my own mind.
Agreed. I think Will said it was a pretty short-term thing. He didn't put a specific timetable on when he'd return, but AJ missed the entire preseason. So it is interesting to me to see how his role will look as the season goes on. You're going to have injuries at some point in time. You're going, McCollum and Middleton will get some rest days. They'll get some games off. And so he will get an opportunity both with the Wizards, and I think he will spend some time with the Go-Go at points. So we'll see how it goes along. Who was along similar lines, by the way, Justin Champagnie. He's gotten spot time at forward, but he has not gotten consistent playing time yet this season. And for a guy who had a really nice 2024-25 campaign, he's getting a bit squeezed out of that wing room right now.
Yeah, it's that competition.
Justin
Champagnie, he's a player I really like. We'll see what where he fits into their development plan over the course of the season. There's some guys like Will Riley, for instance, he's going to get the minutes. I think Justin Champagnie, maybe is, since he wasn't a high draft pick, a recent high draft pick, maybe for him it'll be more so about kind of like proving yourself rather than minutes being reserved for him further down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Who's your next stock down?
That's it for stock down. So do you have any more?
I have one more. It's really early, but Cam Whitmore's game has been a little bit up and down for me, shooting 42% from the field, 18.2% on threes. He's got the highest usage rate of his career. He does have a little bit of a higher assist percentage, which tells me that he's passing the ball pretty well. He has made some nice passes. I think it was the Milwaukee game, the season opener, where he had back-to-back assists to Trey in the right corner. And the second one in particular was not an assist because I think Trey took a dribble in the middle, but he makes that pass really early, reads the weak side help coming over and whips the pass over. So that's the kind of thing you'd like to see more of, but there have been some ill-advised shots. When he's got into the rim, it's been a little bit more of an adventure than I thought. He's shooting just 62% there. That's in line with his career numbers, and that's decidedly below average. He's got all the athletic tools in the world. To me, that signals that his rim struggles are more about what opportunities he chooses to take when he gets inside. And so I'm curious how that gets ironed out as the season goes along.
Yeah, he's a fascinating player to watch and just consider the fit here, because at first blush, it seems like, the perfect fit, coming home, playing for the team that, he grew up rooting for, as long as playing at home is an issue. But, it's kind of a similar situation to what he had in Houston, where the Wizards are expecting the same things of him, to defend, to be a willing passer. So he's kind of got to continue to progress in the same way that he was trying to in Houston to earn minutes. And while in Houston, obviously, there's more star power at the wing position with Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, both of whom I think are going to be future All-Stars. Yes, I think Tari Eason's a future All-Star too. Yes. He just bet on himself. He just bet on himself with a contract, and I think he was very smart for doing so, because I think he is a fantastic young player. But, that is also the deepest position here, right? The wing spot, and Bilal Coulibaly isn't even playing yet. So it is kind of interesting, the parallels in that regard on the court and the standards that I think Brian Keefe is holding him to at this moment.
Yeah, we'll see how obviously it's early, it's just 3 games, but we'll see how it progresses as the season goes on. Let's get to audio of the week and listen to what Kyshawn George had to say about Chris Middleton's return to the Pfizer Forum after the Wizards lost to the Milwaukee Bucks.
I mean, it shows like why we play the game of basketball is to bring something to the city, is to win championships, and it shows that the fans remember those type of stuff. They remember what you give to the city, the impact you had on the game, and it was kind of the first time like I had a player on my team go back and the whole away crowd was cheering for him at the start. It was kind of amazing to see, and I'm going to work towards that for the rest of my life.
Let's go to ahead of the curve. A too early take that you could be true, but aren't too confident in and aren't tied to. What's yours?
So I'm excited about this one. Trey Johnson will make 200 threes this year as a rookie. That's a really high number for a rookie, but he's made multiple threes in every game. He's averaging 3 per game. It's got him on pace for 246 threes this season. Now, he'd have to play all 82, but the rookie record is 206. That was set by Keegan Murray a few years ago. So that's in play. And with the start that he's off to, averaging 3 made threes a game and shooting 43%, as you mentioned earlier, Bub Carrington's franchise rookie three-point record, I think we already knew that it was in jeopardy, but right now, I did the math. Trey's on pace to pass that in early February. So that might end up being light work for Trey Johnson.
I like that. That's a really good one. It could very well happen. He's a dynamic shooter. He's going to get a lot of opportunities to shoot the ball. He's going to be encouraged to do so. And if there's a ability for the Wizards to get consistent rim pressure, he's going to get a lot of minutes as well. He doesn't need a lot of space to shoot a three-pointer, and he's more than willing to do so. So great. You touched on mine a little bit, but I'll say that personally, I dramatically underestimated Bilal Coulibaly's presence as a point of attack defender. I thought that Kyshawn George entering the season would be able to replicate to some degree what has happened. And I think that you see that there's a pretty sizable gap between the two in that area. I think that Bilal Coulibaly is a pretty firm starter at some point again this season. Not immediately once he returns, just because there's going to be some level of acclimation process. But eventually, I think you'll see him in the starting lineup. I don't know who comes out yet. Maybe it's after, maybe it's in the games where McCollum and Middleton aren't playing. That's kind of a cop-out answer. Maybe one of McCollum or Middleton. I don't think either of those guys goes to the bench, but maybe it's Bub going to the bench. But I think that Bilal Coulibaly will be a starter for the Wizards again this season.
That's a good one, and I think he's proven his value so far. And he is pretty close to a prototypical wing defender. I think the one thing that might determine that over time is how strong he gets. I think his ability to move his feet, flip his hips, his length, his instincts. He basically doubled his deflections per 36 minutes last year. So I think the instincts as the game is slowing down for him are really starting to shine. So I think he has a chance to really be an impact defensive player. And, usually you think of the guy to stop the ball at the perimeter looking like a Lou Dort or a Marcus Smart, but Bilal Coulibaly is probably the best option they have to do that. And I think if he can do it, if he can stop, I don't know if anyone can stop SGA from getting into the paint, but, guys like that, if he can at least bump them off their path, then I think a lot of the defensive pieces that they've collected could start falling into place, because that is so important for everything else. I know I've shared this to you on Press Row, but the more I've watched the NBA, the more I've realized that there's parallels to other sports. It all starts at the point of attack. Like, if you can stop dribble drives, it makes it easier for people behind you. It's the same thing in like football. If you have a great defensive line, it makes things easier for the cornerbacks. They have to guard the wide receiver for fewer seconds, and every second matters. In baseball, if you can induce soft contact, it's going to make your shortstop and your second baseman look much better. And in hockey, it's about blocking shots and changing the velocity on the way to the net. So it all starts at the point of attack, and as important as it is, I think that just increases the value for Bilal Coulibaly on this roster.
Yeah, it's all about the most efficient shot in the game is at the rim or getting fouled. And so if you're able to stop someone from getting there, in addition to that, not have your defense get out of position, rotating to try and take that away, and then potentially leaving an open three, which happened again and again for the Wizards so far in this early season. That's a huge weapon for a defense, and that's exactly what Bilal Coulibaly could provide when he returns. Let's get to the mailbag, where on Reddit, Roswell Hassenpfeffer asks, what's the protocol for teaching a young player to avoid foul trouble? Kyshawn, obviously. What do you got?
Well, I think obviously it's about education and the coaching staff and showing them film, and the point of emphasis is what's the plural of emphasis? Point of emphasis, points of emphasis.
There we go.
They change every year, and one thing that was really interesting, this is important to note, is the NBA has a new program this year where they actually sent real NBA referees to every training camp, and when the Wizards had that scrimmage that Kyshawn George hit the game winner in, that I'm sure Wizards fans heard about, they had real refs sent by the league as every team received this training camp to sort of go over what the fouls are, what they're going to call. So I think it's about education, learning the tendencies of other players, learning the referees, learning how games are officiated, getting to know referees. I think games, we just hear this all the time. You're reffed a little bit different the older and more experience you get in the league, the more referees know you. But what's one thing that's really interesting about Kyshawn George, I think I'm going to continue to go back to what Jordan Poole said about him last year. And I'm sure you remember this because he said it multiple times. He said that Kyshawn George is like a really physical defender, and like in an unusual way for a young player. And he said that like he's going to get calls. He's going to get fouls called on him now, but if he sticks with it, like over the course of his career, like the officiating crews are going to get to know him and get to know the way he plays, and that's going to be more accepted as you go on. Like you can sort of basically the way Jordan Poole described it is you can like set a tone earlier in your career and develop a reputation as a physical defender and sort of get away with it more than others do if you continue on that path throughout your career. So I think for him, it's continuing to learn things, get more experience, have things slow down, learn the tricks of the trade. Some of these guys, obviously James Harden, DeMar DeRozan, are probably known for it the most. SGA's got some tricks in his bag, but like there's little things that they do, rip throughs at the rim, sort of dribbling the ball near you and then pulling it back at the last second. Like there's, the way they lean when they shoot. There's all these little things that you just pick up on as you go that even if you know them, you might still get the foul called on you if you're a rookie, but you can start to sort of spot those things. So I think it's all about his education, but I would go back to what Jordan Poole said, and like if Kyshawn George trusts the process, he could be the kind of physical tone-setting defender that every team would love to have.
Absolutely. I mean, you saw in last year's playoffs how OKC, Alex Caruso, was able to get away with a lot, obviously playing against a bigger guy like Nikola Jokic, but the Thunder as a team foul a lot, but they're also allowed to play physical defense because you can't call everything. It's kind of, to use another cross-sport analogy, it's kind of
I love those, if you can tell.
It's like the Legion of Boom, right? Brandon Browner could play really close to the line of scrimmage, and you can't call every single penalty, and so right now, they kind of
Brandon Browner is the reference from Legion of Boom. That's interesting.
That's the one I specifically remember playing particularly physically, to be fair. But obviously, Richard Sherman did a lot of the good work.
Yeah, you could have gone Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, Brandon Browner, sure.
Listen, it always stood out to me how physical he was. But so that's part of it. The returns on Kyshawn being physical have not shown up yet. I still do think he's getting whistled a lot. But another way that a team can help a player deal with foul trouble is let him play through it. The Wizards know what they're playing for this season. There's no need to sit Kyshawn for extended minutes, and Brian Keefe is not doing that. Kyshawn George has averaged 5 fouls a game this season. That's a lot. He averaged 3 last season, playing a little less minutes, but he's only fouled out twice in his career. Yesterday was just a second time. He's gotten 5 fouls in a game, though, 9 times. And so he has an awareness of when he can take risks and when he can't take risks and when he can't take risks. And so that's a important skill for him to continue to develop. And eventually you hope that instead of picking up 5 fouls, he's able to stop at 4, because you want him to be an aggressive defender. You want him to be someone, you get 6 fouls for a reason. There's no reason to stop at 3, but you also don't want to put yourself in a position where late in the game you have to play tentative because you've already picked up 5 fouls.
Yeah, and it should be noted, I think, that Kyshawn George is a very physical player on offense, too.
Mm-hmm.
And you alluded to this earlier, but it kind of reminds me, I had sort of like a mind-blowing point made to me one time by an assistant GM in the NBA. They said that, like, in today's day and age, you can get away with, like, significantly more physical contact as an offensive player than you can as a defensive player. It's just the way that the rule book is. So as much as we focus on his physical defense, like, I think he's trying to do that on offense too. And we've seen it, particularly in the preseason. There were a lot of like moves where he would sort of use his forearm to get separation and not get called for it. He might become one of those players like, Jalen Brunson does it a lot, like Julius Randle. A lot of them have played for the Knicks, where like they just get away with a lot of physical contact on the offensive end. So that's also something to keep in mind with him, because he might be setting the proper tone in that regard as well.
Yeah, he uses that little bump move and gets to a mid-range a bunch of times. He got called for it against Dallas, I remember, for an offensive foul, but he's got into it a lot other times and not gotten the whistle. Let's move on to the last thing for today. What question do you have about the Wizards over the next week?
Definitely what they look like, what their defensive rating looks like after this next stretch of their regular season schedule, because I thought it looked difficult, and then I looked at the rest of the schedule, and this is, I think, quite objectively the toughest stretch that they're going to go through all year. And I'll bring up their schedule right now. It goes till November 16th when they play the Brooklyn Nets, but it's Sixers, Thunder, Magic, Knicks, the Celtics, who are 0-3, but it's still the Celtics, and it's at Boston, Cavaliers, Mavericks, Pistons, Rockets. Their defensive rating is, I think, going to be affected by this gauntlet that they're about to go through. And as I mentioned, I think it's going to be heavily skewed. And so there's going to be some context that we're probably going to want to point out. And also, Bilal Coulibaly coming back, once he does, that'll be important, but it's probably going to take him a couple games to get his legs under him. So I think we're going to, in part, like find out what their defense is made of, but probably see them really struggle at times. And I think after that, maybe be stronger because of it.
Yeah, I actually had the exact same thing, so I'll pivot ever so slightly. I will ask, what does Alex Sarr look like? I'm always excited to see Alex Sarr match up against one of the league's best big men. And over the next week, you've got Embiid, you've got Chet, and you've got Cat. And Cat in particular gave Sarr fits in the games they played each other last season. And so I'm curious what his defense looks like against that pick and pop threat, and how it looks different with how Mitchell Robinson plays into that now.
Yeah, and, Alex Sarr, I thought what he did against Ryan Kalkbrenner, I think Bijan might have mentioned this. Like, it was kind of an interesting thing to watch because, yes, we see him go up against the best, and that seems like a big test. But what happens when he's a second-year player and he's going up against a rookie who's a second-round pick, who actually I think is going to surprise people based on where he was drafted? He's four-time Defensive Player of the Year in the Big East, and he looked good in the Summer League. And Alex Sarr didn't seem to have any problem with him. So, like, sometimes we think of, like, the good teams, like, for instance, not just an individual player. Like, well, what do they look like when they're going up against the NBA's best? Well, the good teams also beat up on the teams that they're supposed to beat up on. And I think that's an important part of professional sports, is, like, you don't play with your food, is, like, an expression some people say. And I thought that was impressive how Alex Sarr probably realized the advantage that he had in that matchup, and he took advantage of it.
Yeah, win your matchups decisively. On the defense point, so the Wizards are 24th on defense right now. If they are out of the bottom three after a week, that will be impressive, I will say.
I agree.
Perfect. Chase, where can people find your work?
Well, you can find my work at monumentalsportsnetwork.com, the Monumental Plus app, and Bijan Todd, my colleague, and I, we now have a YouTube show called Off the Bench. So if you'd watch that and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. And Varun, I just realized I saw you last night about 7 hours ago, and I'm seeing you right now, and I'm going to see you in like an hour at Wizards practice. So I'm getting a lot of Varun these days.
There we go. What could be better? Thank you so much, Chase. I really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Chase for hopping on. Really appreciate his insight on the Wizards. Reminder, if you like the show and you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please leave a 5-star review. You can follow me on most social media platforms at Varun Shankar, and you can find the show using the handles in the episode description. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you guys next time.